yes, we do want to think about our weight, okay, and I do think but with the primary purpose of improving our health. I think we should be worried about our health. And if you want to worry about your health, you need to improve your diet. Then think about eating a little bit less of it. But I think more importantly, improve your diet. What are you eating? Are you eating fiber? Are you eating enough protein? What kind of fats are you eating? And for that, calories, absolutely useless.
You're listening to the Family Health Lab. Healthy parents, healthy kids.
Hi there, Dr. Giles Yeo. Thank you so much for joining me from sunny Sydney, I believe.
It is actually sunny at the moment. Lovely temperature, perfect temperature.
You're on a whirlwind trip doing a lecture series. Your lectures sound fascinating, the topic titles of those. I've had a look in Melbourne and Sydney. And how are you enjoying your travel so far, your time down under?
I mean, it's been fantastic. Look, for one thing, before even anything else about the lectures, I'm coming from. At the moment, I think it's just below zero in Cambridge. So trust me, this is anything here. Sunshine, a little bit of warmth. I'm having a wonderful time weather-wise. But the science and actually meeting the people has also been fantastic.
You're a geneticist, you're a lecturer at Cambridge, you're also a broadcaster, presenter, author, and around the topics of obesity, genetics, hunger, weight regulation. So diving into that, I'm really interested what motivates you. Why are you passionate about those topics?
I never always wanted to do a lot of communication. I mean, I started life as a geneticist, as an undergraduate in my PhD, and then post PhD, I ended up working on severe childhood obesity, and it started off just sort of serendipity. It was the job I ended up with, and we were looking at the genetics of severe childhood obesity at the time. Then I remembered, and you asked me why I'm still in it, why I have a passion for this. It was early 2000s. I think it might even have been around 2001 or 2002 or something. A senior colleague of mine at the time brought me to some fancy schmancy dinner in Cambridge. It's one of these Harry Potter type things, with long tables. And it was a fancy dinner, and I was sat opposite this guy who was a chronologically challenged, shall we say, bearded gentleman, professor of something or other or something. And he asked me, "What do you do? What do you do?" As people do often ask when you're in a situation like that. And I told him, I says, "Look, at the moment I'm studying the genetics of severe childhood obesity." And he then said exactly like this. Okay, do you know what your problem is? Jabbing his finger in my face. Like I said, I'm trying to have dinner. And he says, "You give fat people," and that's the emphasis he actually placed, an excuse. So dinner wasn't so enjoyable after that, but I tried to change his mind. But it was in a taxi on the way back home after where I thought, now this is an educated human being, with many alphabets after his name, and this is his view on obesity. And this was severe childhood obesity. We were studying really, really quite severe kids at the time. But what it did then dawn upon me, I says, well, I can't just, if I want to stay within this field, I can't just do the work if this is the prevailing attitude. And I do think it's still largely the prevailing attitude in society, and leave it alone. At least I couldn't. And so from then on, I sort of made a mental promise to myself to say that, you know what, when opportunities arise for me to communicate science around the area of body weight, in addition to scientifically, but that's my day job, um, outside of the bubble, of the academic bubble in which I worked in, I would grab it. I would grasp the opportunity when given. And I was fortunate enough to be given opportunities in order to do so, and also to continue working within the field. I have had experienced some success, and so I'm still here. That's the way it works. Um, and that's the answer. I started it off as a job because I was trained in genetics, and I ended up doing that thing. But it was that encounter that really said, "Hang on a second, this really can't be right." Because the other interesting thing that I thought, and reason why, was his freedom of expressing his opinion about this. Now, because if he were expressing the opinion, I studied something else, some other disease, or if we were talking about something else and he made a comment about race, or he made a lot of things, he wouldn't have said it out. You wouldn't feel so free to say it out, whatever you have in your little tiny head. But yet, when it came to people who were larger, he felt the freedom to say it because it was perfectly fine. So that anyway, that was a very long answer.
No, it's
but
a
that's my
great
reason.
answer. You've covered a few different points there that I'd just like to get clarification on. But you feel that the prevailing attitude is still of that mindset. I mean, looking back a few decades ago, when we were growing up in the school ground, the dialogue around some diseases and some illnesses was extremely negative and derogatory. But that language has all but disappeared as I understand it, and you just would not get away with, and you just would not want to talk about somebody with an illness, a disease, or a condition in that way. But you feel that the prevailing attitude towards obesity is still negative, stigmatized, judgmental, compared to any other disease, which I think is an important point. But also you're referring there, Giles, to obesity as a disease or as an illness, metabolic disease. So can you just clarify, is that your view that we should be treating this differently as we are doing?
I think so. I think it's becoming increasing. It's not a unique view, I want to say, from me, that we should treat obesity as a disease. I think we should clarify, first of all, what obesity means. And then once we clarify it, I think it then becomes clear that it is a disease. So I don't think that obesity should just be a number on a scale. So I don't think it's just weight. I don't think it's just a BMI, which is your weight in kilograms over your height in meters square, because that literally is just a number on a scale. I think that obesity should be defined as carrying too much fat that it begins to influence your health. Then, if we take that as the definition of obesity, then by definition, it's a disease because it's influencing your health. Now, the interesting question to ask is how much is too much fat? Okay. And is it the same for everybody? It's certainly not the same for everybody. So I think that is going to be the crux of the argument. All of us have a safe fat carrying capacity, an amount of fat that we can store safely. But it is going to be different. Your safe fat carrying capacity is going to be different from my safe fat carrying capacity, for example. Because I'm East Asian, okay, I can carry less fat before I tilt into risk for metabolic disease. Someone from South Asia, Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, will have exactly the same thing. Whereas white people, Polynesian people, famously, okay, can gain a lot more weight before actually tilting into a risk for disease. And this is down in large part, to our capacity to store fat safely. So, which is why weight in of itself doesn't help this disease element, because there are going to be some larger people who are perfectly healthy and some skinny people with type 2 diabetes, right? I mean, clearly most of it is linked to fat mass, and the more risk you have to disease. But that, I think that's why it's a disease, because I think we got to consider it weight plus risk of disease, plus risk of other comorbidities, we call it, related diseases. So by definition, it is a disease.
And I have heard you talking about those issues and other studies and research that shows that somebody from a different population may have double the risk of diabetes type 2 than somebody else of the same
at the equivalent weight.
At the equivalent weight. And I mean, we're in Australia at the moment, and that looking at the Aboriginal population, that would be an example there for much more likely to be diagnosed with diabetes and high risk of other rates of disease. So that's interesting. So what about the prevalence now? I mean, we're living our best lives, really. We have access to so much information, so much nutritional information, so many different types of food very conveniently. But yet where we're heading towards with our obesity and our overweight, I mean, not only going in the wrong direction, but just going back to your interest in children's health and children's obesity, I mean, those rates are absolutely shocking. So, yeah, can we just talk a little about the prevalence, but also what are the contributing factors that are cropping up and causing this?
So, I mean, the prevalence is ridiculous. It's what 1 in 8 people in the world now. 1 in 8 people in the world are classed as obese. Okay, now that's an average, incidentally, because if you now take, I think Australia and the UK have roughly the same numbers, And we're probably running at between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 with obesity in Australia and the UK, 1 in 3 in the United States. Easily. Okay. So, but then you have other countries which is less, but which the prevalence are less. So the prevalence wise is terrible. And once again, it's not obesity that kills per se or puts you in hospital. It's all of the associated illness that then come rushing in with it. Then if you look at childhood obesity, obesity used to be probably 30, 40 years ago, there's always been obesity. It's just the prevalence hasn't been this high, but it almost used to be considered like middle-aged spread, right? Where you reach 50 some years old and suddenly you have a pot belly or whatever you want to call it, or your hips grow out, or all these things. But now increasing numbers of children have obesity. So I only know the UK numbers, but once again, I find it hard to believe that the numbers will be different here in Australia. But the UK numbers, if you actually take 12-year-olds, let's just take 12-year-olds because that's leaving primary school and going into secondary school, then prevalence of obesity is sitting around 25%. Okay, 25%. Now, in and amongst that, okay, is a tragedy. And the tragedy is this. Now, if you segment the population into socioeconomic quintiles, so 20%, 20%. Now, if you take the top quintile, which is actually going to be, I would have thought, largely the people that are going to be listening to this podcast and the people that I speak to, okay? Then prevalence of obesity at 12-year-old in the UK is probably at around the 13% mark, 14%. It's still quite high, right? But if you look at the bottom quintile, socioeconomically, rates of obesity are 33 to 34%. So way more than twice the risk. There's no genetic difference between rich and poor. It's an accident of birth. So the tragedy here is that poverty, in effect, more than doubles your risk of obesity. So you now go back and says, well, what could be driving this, right? What is the cause of this increase in prevalence? I think there's going to be genetic increases in prevalence in response to the food environment we live in, okay? Because that's just the way. So as the environment moves, our genes are static, but the way they respond to the environment changes depending on the change of the environment. Ultimately, that's the situation that you're there. But then if you then have really big changes in access to healthy food, if I live in Cambridge, I live in a nice little leafy village 10 miles outside Cambridge, we're out in the sticks. I don't even have a shop in my village. Deliveroo doesn't deliver to my village because it's too far away. And so if I were hungry, if I have a genetic drive to eat and I was hungry at home at night, then either I get dressed, hop in my car or bike, cycle somewhere and buy my food, or I look at my fridge and eat carrots and hummus or whatever it is I have in my fridge. But if I have that equivalent genetic drive, but suddenly I'm in an inner city place above a kebab shop or above a chip shop, suddenly the ability to just go down and actually get different type of food that I would be exposed to is suddenly there. And therefore, this really big difference in obesity. So there's the genetic increase, the genetic drive, but then you have the huge segments of society with such different responses, and that's going to be environmentally driven.
Environment and that push of exposure that you're talking about is a big factor. I was actually talking about this earlier today, just giving examples of when I was traveling around the UK on delivering a well-being program that was related to physical activity. It was a great program, actually, Walking for Health. The differences in parts of the UK and how really apparent it is the obesity rates in one population versus the leafy green beautiful villages and suburbs and the different demographics. And I was just giving an example of one area that I was in, and I was looking for something for lunch and made it a little bit of a mission, because I had so much time for my train, to just go around and assess the local environment. And in an hour and a half, I didn't find any fresh food in that area. It was Redcar, North England. And that was probably actually one of the most obese communities that I'd been in as well. And just really, really apparent. But yeah, no fresh food, not an apple, nothing at all. Only fast food and convenience food and junk food. So yeah, that exposure is pushing in. We also have other factors, medications, wider health, mental health as well. But on those lifestyle factors, I've heard you talk under the titles, maybe a provocative title of "Is Obesity a Choice?" And this links very much back into a number of your topics. So I wondered if you could expand on that concept, because really, back to what you were saying at the very beginning, the implication from the public perception is that it's a choice, and people can choose to eat or not eat. So yeah, could you expand on that theme that you talk about?
I mean, I really don't think it's a choice, but then you might say, well, hang on a second, but people are choosing what they want to eat, right? They're choosing to order 1 slice, 2 slices, 3 slices of pizza, whole damn pizza, right? So how can that not be a choice? I guess there is a nuance. There is a nuance where the way that I would describe it is that we do not gain or lose weight overnight. Okay, so any given meal, no matter how large it is not going to perceptibly change your body weight overnight. Your body weight, however, is a function of thousands, hundreds, thousands of feeding events that have happened over the past few years. Now, imagine if because of your genetic hand of cards, okay, which is what I study, that you are a few percent less likely to say no. 5%. That probably is the round range we're talking about. So not twice. People are not eating twice as much. Say 5% of the time, you say, "Oh, I'm gonna have the second slice of pizza." 1 out of 20 times, right? Suddenly, if you're thinking of 5% over thousands of feeding events, that is hundreds of thousands of calories. So over the period of time, that food intake begins to influence your health. And remember, energy balance. So if you eat just a little bit too many calories, but over a long period of time, it's cumulative. It's one of the few things we do in life that is cumulative. Our blood pressure is not cumulative, otherwise we would pop. Our blood sugar is not cumulative because otherwise we would turn into a sugar crystal. Our temperature, these are all homeostatic things. This is under control. Our temperature cannot be cumulative because we would boil. Okay, all of these things are there. When you eat a little bit too much, even a few calories over a long period of time, you gain weight. And so at each meal, there is a little bit of a choice, but that doesn't change your body weight. It is cumulative that it then begins to change your body weight. In casino terms, the house will always win. That's how casinos work. Everyone has a little less of a chance of winning in a casino. Otherwise, the casinos don't function. Okay. And this is going to be the same as long as if with a certain genetic hand of cards, this is not going to be true with everybody. Okay. If you've got a certain set of cards that you've been dealt with from your folks, from your parents, then it isn't a choice, because then you subtly over a lifetime then just end up eating a little bit more than everyone else. And so therefore you end up getting weight. So no, I don't think that obesity is a choice. And that's from a biological perspective, let alone all the social factors that we've just discussed.
And the food environment, which you've
Exactly, yes.
alluded to, yeah. So calorie counting and add that as a concept, I've heard you really take that apart as a method to rely on, a simple maths in of calories and maths out. It's not really doing a full service to justice to people trying to manage not just weight and energy and thermodynamics, but health, a healthful life. So can you talk a bit more to that point? Because really you have said that calories probably shouldn't be the priority in terms of living a healthy life and healthy weight.
So whenever I talk about this, whenever I say calories don't count, which is what I always say, people think I'm anti-physics. Listen, check this out. I completely understand that 200 calories of chips is twice the portion of 100 calories of chips. Of course, I understand that. Okay. So yes, if you ate less chips by calorie counting, you would eat less chips and you probably would lose weight. But so is 200 grams of chips, twice the portion of 100 grams of chips. And no one is trying to compare 200 grams of chips to 200 grams of carrots. So ultimately, that's what I'm talking about. Calories do give you one piece and only one piece of information: how much food you're eating, which is in some points an important piece of information, but only one piece of information. Now, if you want to try and improve your diet, however, then calorie counting is useless. And the reason why it's useless is because it is blind to any nutritional information. It doesn't know how much fiber is in the food, how much fat, sugar, salt, whether or not the fat is saturated or not, blah, 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 all of the things that are there. The calorie doesn't care. Okay, the calorie just tells you how much food is there. And I think that we want to think about our health. Yes, we do want to think about our weight. Okay, and I do think but with the primary purpose of improving our health. Sure, some people want to lose the weight so they can fit in the wedding dress, so they go to their daughter's wedding or whatever scenario you want to go. And that's absolutely fine. But in your general life, I think we should be worried about our health. And if you want to worry about your health, you need to improve your diet. Then think about eating a little bit less of it. But I think more importantly, improve your diet. What are you eating? Are you eating fiber? Are you eating enough protein? What kind of fats are you eating? And for that, calories, absolutely useless.
I think that's a really, really good point. And I mean, taking the chips, doubling the size of the chip portion, that a good point is an avocado versus the chips, that in the same calorie quantity,
Yes.
you're getting so much more nutrition from one than the other. But if we're simply using a mathematical formula, I think it really tells us very, very little about long-term health and potentially managing that weight as well. And getting satiated and feeling full and feeling good and having energy, because you're burning potentially protein, or you're having fiber that breaks down slower, etc. So yeah, there's so much more nuance and complication. But yet the nutrition world for many years has just been obsessed by the calories in, calories out, and counting that, and low fat model, which is perhaps driven by people wanting a simpler approach. I'm not sure, but you did mention the word diet in there, and so that brings me on to you do talk about different diets and different diet styles, and you're quite knowledgeable. This is another area that you're perhaps you're interested in. So what's your take on diet? And yes, I've heard you break down the word diet actually as well, which I hadn't heard before, which was interesting.
So you're right. Diet comes from actually the Greek word dieta. I can't pronounce it. I think it's diata, which I think is a Greek word, which means a way of life. Now, isn't that lovely?
Yes,
Right? Because
yeah.
right? Because our food should be a way of life. These days, when we mention the word diet, you scrunch up. You're thinking, we've almost some people may have taken words that are mean something else and empowered it. We have de-empowered the word diet. We've taken the word diet, which was lovely and meaningful and what have you, and converted it into something of exclusion. Whereas I think that we should consider diets as something of an exploration and understanding. So, to explore and understand our food more and our food environment more, so we can make better decisions about our food, so that we can actually choose a diet that actually works for us, rather than something of exclusion. Okay. So now the thing about diets is that actually, all the toxicity aside, then the majority of diets, and if we assume that when we're discussing diets here, it's people that want to lose weight, there are many reasons why people go and change their diets. They suddenly got irritable bowel syndrome, they become type 2 diabetic, or what have you. But the vast majority of people change their diets or go on a diet to lose weight. Okay, this is the case. Then any diet that puts you into a negative energy balance, meaning that the energy in, just from a pure energy perspective, you reduce the amount of energy you're storing, okay, versus burning, then you will lose weight, okay, in the short term at least. And that is a diet that works. So 90, the main issue is that people can't stick to most diets, and the moment you stop a diet, the weight will come back on. Okay, this is going to be the case. I don't care what people say. This is going to happen unless you change your lifestyle or behavior, or you stay on a diet forever. The weight will come back on. And that is probably the problem of diets. Diets work by some very simple rules. A lot of people make all kinds of stuff up, but by some very simple rules. But the crucial thing is finding a diet that will suit you. not only your biology, but your lifestyle. Okay, are you a parent? Do you work shifts? How do you commute to work? All these things that are there, because it's got to suit your biology and it's got to suit you. Because if it doesn't, you won't be able to stick to it. And if you don't stick to it, the weight will come back on. So, I mean, we can go into individual diets. You can ask me about that if you wish. But broadly, if you take a look at all diets, most of them will work to some degree, I think, in the short term. There are some really batshit crazy diets, okay, which are probably not worth doing. But the vast majority of diets, within the normative range of diets that we look at, are going to work for some people at least some of the time.
Yes, and that's where we need to get to. We need to get to the food input that's going to work for people to get to the healthy weight that they are healthy at, and they feel good and they can maintain and sustain. That's just so crucial, culturally, and part of their lifestyle, whether they're working or not. Yeah, that's really interesting. How do we get to that point then? And I like the term lifestyle because, yes, I think the approach to weight loss is often diet, as in a negative sense, as you've explained. And then when I'm a bit better or have achieved some goals, I can go back. So, how do we move it over to more of a lifestyle switch where this suits us, this has worked for us, but we're now maintaining, we're comfortable, and we're going to stick with this. And this is a game where I think the food environment probably needs more attention as well, because it's pushing in on individuals, but pushing in on the children we were talking about earlier, through their school, through their nursery, through their shops, through their sports venues, through their parties. And they're going to really be suffering, particularly with those numbers and statistics you set out earlier, because what we know is if you're an obese child, you're much more likely to be an obese adult. And the younger that happens, the more those risk factors that you mentioned for cancer, for stroke, for cardiovascular disease, for diabetes type 2, which in itself is such a risk factor for all of the other ones, your mortality, all of those risks. So where do we go with this then?
I mean, look, the reality is, if I knew, I would be very rich and I'd be somewhere else. I think probably. No, I mean, okay.
Sydney.
In all seriousness, I think the biggest mistake that people make, that policymakers make, okay, is to think that there is going to be a one size fits all solution, or not even a one size fits all, a few size fits all solution. And I think that route is going to lead to failure, like it has been over the past few decades. And the reason is because you do need to segment the population and figure out what works best for the person in front of you. I really truly believe that that's going to be the case, and then you're actually going to end up with a better chance of getting something to work. So, for example, if the richer poor thing is very, very important, because ultimately, if we are talking, for example, about calories or food labeling, for example, or looking at more information, then that only works if you have the mental capacity, okay, and the time and the wherewithal to look and try and absorb and make a decision. Now, if you don't have that capacity, I'm not talking cognitively. I'm talking if you don't have time because you're working two minimum wage jobs. What happens if you don't have the resources? So you don't have the cash. Okay, you only have a tenner you need to feed your family. Then your goal is not to look at the back of the nutritional content, but to say, well, what's the cheapest food I can get to feed my kids? Okay, and so in that sector, how do you then fix that? Calorie labeling and information and education and eating lentils and growing food in the back garden in your leafy school is not going to work, because that is unrealistic. Okay, so Michael Marmot, who I interviewed just recently, actually, who wrote, he writes prolifically about food insecurity, okay, and inequalities, in particular within the UK setting, has calculated that if you take the UK healthy eating plate, okay, which covers blah and blah and blah, that if you were working minimum wage, if you're in the bottom, 10 or 20% societally, you would be spending nearly 50% of what you're making in order to try and eat healthily.
Fascinating.
Right? So okay, so there's that. Now, then there are going to be people, so we need to think about how you do it equitably when you are poorer. Then there are going to be people like us Okay, now we do have the choice because we have more cash, we have more time, you know, and then I think you need a different approach. So for that, then maybe education is the answer. Maybe trying to teach people more about why calories that don't matter as much, or this or that, the difference between monounsaturated versus polyunsaturated fats, the difference between free sugars and not, whatever terminologies we throw about and talk about. Yeah, I think for people with the spare executive capacity, I think that probably is a solution. Then there are going to be people who are severely obese or have severe obesity who may very well have to turn to drugs. Okay. And there are going to be others who are like me who could lose a few pounds that maybe I need a better behavioral intervention, whatever. And you can tell that there's just a load of things beyond just your biology that you have to take into account before you roll out some kind of intervention.
And it needs to be well thought out. I'm thinking of some of the
Evidence-based and well thought out. Yeah.
Evidence-based and well thought out. I'm thinking of a few different programs in the UK. Again, on schools, I worked for Food for Life program for schools, getting schools up to a better standard of nutrition, and not just focusing on the quality of the food, which was a priority, probably the key priority, but also the setting, getting the dining hall set up so that the kids could actually spend longer in the dining hall because more of them would fit in. So instead of rushing them out with something in their hand because of the sheer numbers, but actually reimagining and redesigning halls so that and using shift systems so that they could actually sit and digest and eat the foods. So interventions like that were great. There were some breakfast programs being introduced to schools, which I was really concerned about, taking away cooked foods, eggs, whole foods, and replacing them with Nestle Cheerios and things like that, which I was, interested in because that's funded by the government for good nutrition and for hunger, but I think misguided. So yeah, well thought out. And then there was the app that came out, the government app, on food swaps, which was interesting. And parents who were first using it were pointing out that the swaps were all processed food swaps. There were no real food, whole foods, or even just fruit, or snacks or vegetable snacks or very, very basic food swaps. It was all one ultra processed food because it was a red label, nutrition label for another ultra processed food option. So I think, yes, evidence based, but also just a bit of clearer thoughts behind some of those interventions. And then education, I feel we also have to really watch that food environment that we're setting people up around schools, nurseries, sports venues, the shops, accessing those, all of those issues, setting up the food environment for winning and succeeding at this, because that's really what's crushing in on families, as we've kind of, talked about all the way through. But you did mention a solution for people who really are at a point where they need a medical intervention, perhaps, and we're talking probably the GLP injections as one of the options. I've heard you also refer to those as a cop-out because prevention should be the highest. Oh,
let me just clarify. So I think it can be a cop out for the government. I don't think it's a cop out for a human being.
Oh, good clarification. Yes,
from obesity.
And that was a context.
If someone
I read
with
that.
obesity, yeah, exactly. Then I think they need the drug. But I think the government using it as a cop out not to change the environment is what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, can you talk a little bit more about what that not looks like, not just but those drugs and potential uses for them, and perhaps even what they are, just for people who aren't sure. I mean, I've just heard in the UK that they're much more freely accessible than they are, for example, here in Australia. And I've heard now people are buying them online freely without prescription. I'm not sure if you've heard that, but that wasn't how they were going to be introduced, and it was going to be, I understood, more regulated prescription and with nutrition education, so we don't get that regain straight afterwards. And but your thoughts on that pretty hot topic I'd be interested.
Okay, so first of all, what are these drugs? For those of you who are unfamiliar with them, they are a modified version of a gut hormone called GLP-1. or actually two gut hormones, GLP-1 and GIP, depending on which type of drug we're talking about. But they're modified gut hormones. And their secret power, because normally gut hormones come out, are released from the gut. That's why they're called gut hormones. And they're chopped up pretty quickly. They're chopped up within a couple of minutes in our body. Okay, that's just a natural way of things. These gut hormones, they come up, they tend to, in the native state, enhance insulin secretion by the pancreas, which means that for every given gram of sugar or any food you eat, you get more insulin secretion, so therefore you can handle your glucose better. But it also signals to the brain to make you feel full. And if you feel full, you eat less. What these drugs do is, because of chemical modifications of the native hormone, they stick around the blood for longer. Okay, like now you can use them once weekly, which is what Ozempic or Wegovy does, once weekly injections. And so they work for type 2 diabetes because they help enhance insulin secretion. And they work for obesity because they make you feel fuller, which you then eat less, and then you lose weight. So those are the drugs. Now, the thing about this, however, is that whenever I talk about these drugs, then journalists or to whomever, to a podcaster, then I'm asked the same series of questions, pretty much in some variety, which is fine. This is why I do these things. Yeah. So the first is, should we treat obesity at all? Not you asking, but this is obesity a disease, right? Because if some people are saying you're just medicalizing a condition, then okay. But if actually you are ill because of these things, then yes, you should treat, because why would you not treat a disease? Number one. Number two, well, you regain the weight if you stop taking the drug, as with any drug. Okay, so if you are taking high blood pressure medication, high blood pressure pills, the moment when you're on the pill, your blood pressure is normal. If you stop taking your high blood pressure medication, your blood pressure goes back up. Okay, now it's a different temporal thing when we're talking about food and we're talking about these drugs, but the same is going to happen with your body weight. So they are a drug, okay, and so they'll only work when you're using it. And third, that they don't tackle the root cause of obesity, which they don't, because they're a drug. They'll treat the symptoms. They'll treat the obesity to make you less obese, but it won't prevent obesity. That still requires policy changes. Actually, there's probably a fourth and most critical thing that we're actually looking at here. They're very powerful drugs, very powerful. So they'll work, okay? They'll work whether or not you're fat or skinny, okay? And they'll work whether or not your diet was wonderful before you just ate too much, or whether or not you were eating a terrible diet. So these drugs shouldn't just be rolled out without a wraparound care, without a dietary intervention, without probably an exercise intervention as well to help maintain your lean mass. So these drugs are powerful and they should be used as such, but they need to be used with some thought. They need to be used not just willy-nilly. They should be on prescription only, because they'll work whether or not you're a 350-pound man trying to lose weight, or if you're an 18-year-old girl who's only 90 pounds. Okay, it will stop you eating whatever starting size you are at. Very, very important to think about this. So they do need to be on prescription, with the physician having a line of sight to the person. And you're right that today in the UK, the vast majority of individuals on the drugs, vast majority, having the drugs in the UK, a country with an NHS, are taking it privately. And the private sources of this, some are more scrupulous than others, shall we say, when it comes to the prescription process. So all of these need to be taken into account. But if you're thinking about the treatment of obesity and trying to understand how these things work, which I study on a day job, as I said, it is a remarkable time, because we now actually finally have real functioning tools to treat obesity, and it's a very exciting time. But now that we've entered that space, we need to have a non-hysterical discussion about how to use it as a tool to shift society to try and sustainably keep obesity out. That's what we should do.
Yeah, so it comes with a raft of measures. We don't just seem to do what we seem to have done, let the guards down and kind of let it be used freely, I suppose. And that seems to be what's happening here in Australia. They do seem to have a lot of restrictions and support around it at this stage. I mean, it's early days, but yeah, in America, in the UK, I'm not sure what's happening in America. It's seems to be
America's the Wild West. The American situation is a different one.
Right. Yeah, it always is. But we tend to follow as well. And just a word on that, people talk about those drugs and the positives of them should be mentioned, as well as the negatives, which I think you've covered, the applications where they're actually, treating a disease in somebody who's becoming quite ill, and then manifesting other, risk factors and ill health as a result. I mean, even down to bones and joints and not being able to have operations, etc. So that they probably do have a place. But then with the side effects, as with all drugs, in terms of nausea and digestive issues, etc. But other risk factors, thyroid and kidney issues. But I was also going to mention the muscle mass, which is a key that, as well as the fat loss, there can be muscle mass loss, which can be detrimental for aging. So that's a key issue to mention, as with all medications, there's side effects as well. In that discussion or that explanation, you did touch on exercise should be part of this. So what are your thoughts on exercise and weight loss? And I have heard you speak on this and give clarification as to what you think the usefulness of exercise is.
Exercise is the most wonderful thing in the world. And it is good for pretty much nearly everything in your life. Mentally,
You're a runner.
physically.
Yeah.
Okay. I am a runner. I don't run particularly fast, but I go out and I run. I try and do my best. It is wonderful. You should do it. It isn't, however, good for weight loss. Now, you might think, once again, I'm anti-physics. People all think I'm anti-physics. No, clearly it is, in principle, possible to exercise enough so that you lose weight. Broadly speaking, this is what elite level athletes do. Okay, Olympians and Tour de France cyclists, that because their profession is exercise, they will then end up losing weight and they don't have time to eat. Okay, because they're exercising all the time. Look, us mere mortals who go out and I run this morning or something like that, that's not the case, right? And so, because there's a couple of problems with exercise. With all the good things aside, right? I'm not putting out a message here not to exercise. The issue with exercise and weight loss is a couple of fold. The first one is when you exercise, you feel hungry. No, maybe not immediately after. Different people feel hungry at different times. But broadly speaking, an hour after a run, I'm ravenous. I am. I just this. And that's the first problem. So therefore, you eat. Not a problem in of itself, but your body tends to, unconsciously or consciously, depending on who you are, overestimate how many calories you've burned during a specific exercise bout, and sometimes you overeat over that. So the problem with that is that it is really quite difficult to exercise enough to lose weight without tackling food intake by itself. Now, what it is good for, however, beyond all the great, wonderful stuff I'm talking about, is it's probably actually quite effective in weight maintenance after you have lost the weight. So the point is, you use diet, or whatever baggage that comes with to lose the weight, or drugs to lose the weight, whatever it is you're doing. So you have an intervention, and then what you then do is you do exercise. Now, I'm not necessarily going to the gym or anything like that. Some people like to do that, but moving more, gardening, walking your dog, whatever it is you're doing to help keep the weight off. And I think that's how exercise should be used for the majority of the population. It also keeps your muscle mass up, right? Because you're moving more, particularly if you have a little bit of resistance training, and that's going to be helpful, very, very helpful for you too.
Yes, some interesting statistics on just that muscle mass that linked to longevity, living a longer life, potentially because
linked to health span, not just longevity, which is neither here nor there. Linked to health span. In other words, a longer period of living healthily, which is what we all want, right? Rather than being there living a long time, but in a hospital bed. I don't want that. That's not me anyway. I don't want that.
So exercise good, but it's not the crucial factor. We're back to food. We need to get that right for us as individuals. So there's not one size fits all. But I've heard you talk a lot about moderation, not something that everybody can achieve. It's just, like you say, we need to segment the population. And I mean, just for example, I support people with nutrition protocols. A lot of that is around lowering carbohydrates to some degree, some quite a lot and some moderately, whatever they need. But I do have friends in my life that have gone another diet style, and the low fat, the chicken, is really actually quite repetitive in some ways, really, really suits them. So I'm really intrigued by this different options for different people. And you're talking about one size doesn't fit, segmenting, but what are your thoughts on moderation? And one thing I have seen in your posts is that you do mention moderation, and today this kind of calls for this type of food for me personally. And sometimes moderation is where you get a little bit of pushback. I've noticed that people have said, it's not for me. I'm all or nothing. I can't moderate in that way. So I need to follow something rigidly, whatever that something is. So yeah, thoughts on that?
I think everything in moderation, including moderation, I think is the complete thing. So to paraphrase Oscar Wilde, because I do think it's true. I think it's the strategy that works for you. Okay, so for some people, you're absolutely right, where actually a slightly more rigid way of actually thinking about things, and someone as healthy is less stressful for them, so therefore you do it. And they can keep their weight off as long as you're doing it healthily and not being rigid about an unhealthy diet for you. Again, this can be too much meat, too much fat, too much whatever, okay, for that. Other people are good at moderation. Other people deal with their diets. I think all of us should probably deal with our diets with to varying degrees, not per individual meal. And the reason behind that is because there's always going to be different reasons that you're having a meal. Are you going out for a goodbye party? Is it your child having their birthday party? Are you going out to, is it Christmas time? Whatever. So there are going to be meals where you want to go out, enjoy yourself, indulge and eat amongst friends. And there are going to be times in which, I'm at home tonight, by myself or doing something. This is a really good time to maybe not be so indulgent in what I eat. But if you consider your diet over a period of time, a week, for example, over a week, that's probably a good thing because there's work days, there's weekend days, and consider, well, what have I eaten this week? Okay, I've eaten only so much, or I've gone out on a couple of parties during the week that maybe you want to dial back a little over the weekend. Whereas if during the week, it's been a normal working week, you've just gone to work and come home and done work and come home and you've done what you do, well, then maybe the weekend is different. Maybe you want to go and do something else and eat a bit more and have a couple of glasses of wine. It's up to you. But I think that it's far better, far healthier to think about your diet in periodic times like this, like a week, so that you can have times where you can go to a birthday party, enjoy yourself with this, but other times in which you try and be a bit more disciplined and try and eat a little bit less stuff. That is also moderation, right? Because what you're doing there is, while each meal is not moderation per se, your whole week is moderation. You've taken into account. So I do think there are different ways of dealing with this, healthier ways mentally and healthier ways to ourselves, that we can consider our diets while still understanding that we have to fix it, that we have to eat a little bit less somehow so that we lose the weight.
You're really saying the bigger picture rather than kind of focusing on the particular occasion or even criticizing yourself or beating yourself up over yesterday's whatever it was,
Exactly.
That you had the dessert or something. So big picture thinking and knowing that there will be blips at some point, obstacles and challenges, and you won't make the choice that you wish you had, but then getting back on it. I mean, that said, I think some people, I'm thinking in the past working in the NHS with groups who are diabetic, some people have a different personality with, I'm thinking of an engineer that I was working with, and they want a rigid set of parameters, and they can eat like that because food is more of a fuel than a social experience for them, and they're not foodies. I mean, sometimes you come across those people, and I've got in my own family who can just eat as fuel and they're quite comfortable. So tell me what's going to work, the best parameters around food and nutrition, and give me those rules, and I will easily follow those rules. And a great many of us are more social kind of eaters and emotional eaters, and then we have all of the different nuances around foods and occasions and experiences and friendships and all of that. Yeah, it's a complex beast, isn't it? Really, when you look at it. I was wondering what you're working on at the moment. You've talked that your background was a geneticist and you're doing a series of lectures, but you're also actively involved in research. So what's exciting you? Which particular projects are you working on?
So, I mean, I've got two large sections of work that I work on. I either work on the actual genetics element to it, and we are working with populations largely of children, but also within the larger populations of looking at causes of changes in body weight. Okay, and trying to identify new genes. So that's one whole project that a number of different projects surrounding that, and we identify new genes periodically that we can explore and think about. But probably a big part of my life at the moment is done trying to map the feeding circuits within the brain, because the genetics of body weight is now the genetics of how we now know to be the genetics of how our brain influences our feeding behavior. But the feeding circuitry within the brain, for obvious reasons, have been worked out largely in mice, because you can get the brain out and look at it. And humans, we can't get the brain out of a living human being. We just can't. But now, working with postmortem samples, we have begun to construct the feeding circuits within the brain. We just got a paper accepted or nearly accepted, should be coming out in the new year, I hope, in which we've created a sort of a 3D map of the human hypothalamus, which is the part of the brain which acts as a fuel sensor, and map the feeding circuits from within. I mapped, for example, where all the receptors for these drugs we're talking about bind within there as well. So that's the other project, to look at it from a human context, to try and understand where drugs and hormones are going to signal to within the hypothalamus. So those are my two areas of day-to-day research that I'm doing at the moment.
So new discoveries coming, it sounds like. So yeah, fantastic. So in terms of you, people are really interested in what somebody who's talking on these issues, what actions you make for yourself. Do you have any non-negotiables for your own health in terms of your food? And I see all healthy habits just in general. I know that you post that you enjoy your running. But are there any other non-negotiables?
No, I think for food wise, I would do as I say, not necessarily as I do, because I definitely am a foodie. I do love my food. I do cook most of the time. The vast majority of the time I cook, right from scratch. So that is probably the thing where, yes, I may probably eat a little bit too much. My wife definitely thinks so. But I have, I'll eat out as a takeaway perspective, probably once a week, if that, but probably once a week. Otherwise, I cook. So yes, I do eat lots, and I love my food, but I tend to do my cooking. Now, in terms of non-negotiable, I think that I've got to continue. Running per se is not my thing which I love the most. I just do it when I'm traveling because it's the easiest thing to do. Running gear and a pair of running shoes. My favorite exercise is cycling. I'm road cycling. That's what I love to do. I commute nearly 30 miles a day, 15 miles there, 15 miles back. So I spend a lot of my life on a bike. I've done all kinds of rides. So my favorite exercise is cycling. And I think the non-negotiable line for me has always been for me to live close enough to work. I'm not that close, but close enough for me to continue cycling to work. So I would not take a job in which I am unable to hop on my bike and get to work. So that is my red line. And so when we move houses, I'm not going to move jobs anytime soon. But if I did, that I think to me would be one of the things that I would take a compass. I would draw literally the radius of realisticness of what I can cycle, depending on the topology and all these things. And that would be probably my biggest red line that's not food related for when I move, so that I can continue cycling to work.
I love it. And you've made me, Giles, miss cycling. I did the same. I used to look at jobs and work and homes I was moving to around cycling because I wanted to factor in a commute so I have that exercise in the bag already done, but also just then experienced awesome benefits in terms of mental health. And by the time that you were home from a 30-minute, 40-minute cycle, I felt really, really good, and the baggage of whatever stress from the workday was gone by the time I was in the door. But unfortunately, or fortunately, my commute is very short now. I work from home the majority of time, so that's it's become quite a challenge.
That's a different red line. That's a different. At least you're not in a car driving to the
that's
workplace.
True. Yes, no, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm with you on that. And Cambridge, what a beautiful area. I used to be in green Leicestershire, a few hills, but quite flat, really. So beautiful cycling commute around the countryside there. But yeah, in terms of other people, and I'm not suggesting that you give prescriptive advice or tell them what to do, but in terms of somebody who's listening, interested, struggling, and we know there's a lot of people struggling, and they're trying to do the right thing. You hinted at something earlier which I thought was particularly useful, and it was around, I don't know, you're not restricting necessarily. Going on a diet is always restricted, but I think you alluded to this. Instead of restricting, could we add in? Could we focus on bringing something healthy in, and filling our day, filling our fridge, filling our pantry with things that we enjoy that are really healthful and good for us and support that weight. And instead of restricting, adding in first before we take away. So that would be mine. But to close, what would you suggest people do as a first step or first steps to start making long-term changes, habit changes?
So I think there are, to my mind anyway, I mean, people might disagree with the subtleties of these rules, quote unquote, that I would use. I think that there are things that we can do to improve our diet, whatever dietary approach we choose. I think we need to eat enough protein, plant or animal based, it doesn't really matter. But there is a sweet spot for protein. So if you're not ill in hospital or not an Olympic athlete, then you really want to keep your energy in the day in terms of protein or in your diet, okay, to about 16%. So a little bit higher than average, but actually that's a good amount. I think we need to eat enough protein. I think we need to eat a hell of a lot more fiber than we are doing now. And fiber only comes from plants. Okay, so what I mean is we need to eat more fruit and vegetables, and we do. Okay, and it's very difficult to eat too many fruit and vegetables. Obviously, technically possible, but very difficult to. So by all means, stuff as many fruit and vegetables down you as possible. Now, if you just do those two things, you'll be on a winner already in any dietary approach you choose. There's probably one more, which is a restriction, which is why I've left it last, and that's limiting the amount of free sugars probably you have in your diet to about 5% or less. Now, free sugars are sugars you add and are sugars that are not tied to a fruit. Okay, they're not tied to fiber. So this includes the powdered white stuff, but also includes honey, maple syrup, nectar, orange juice. Okay, anything that's not tied to fiber, I think you should probably limit down to 5% or less. So that would be my one restrictive element. We do eat too much sugar, but I think we need to add more protein to our diets, and I think we need to eat a hell of a lot more fruit. That's what I would do, and apply that to anything you want. Being vegan, being keto, anything. You can use those rules in any diet out there.
Yes, you can, and go with your own approach, but and then also just to emphasize the point you made earlier, cooking from scratch, real foods, and the free sugars thing. Perhaps if you're not sure where to start and you're thinking about those suggestions Giles has made, drinks, soft drinks or the orange juice that you mentioned, but that's often a place, particularly for teens and children, where they're getting a big dose of those free sugars. So it's a really good starting point. But yeah, I really appreciate those tips and strategies. Get started with those, bed them in, and then see how you feel, and before making a next step. But yeah, thank you for taking time out of your whirlwind Australia tour to spend time with me and let me hear more about your work, your research, and your thoughts on these matters. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Giles.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe. This really helps us to be able to create more content.